Good evening, and welcome to Midnight Horror Society. Here we take the strange and the chilling and tell them slowly, like whispers meant for the night. Before we begin, take a second to like the video and subscribe only if you feel at home here. In the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always comforting to see how many of us are awake together in the dark. So dim the lights. Let the sound of the night, rain, crickets, or just the quiet of your room settle around you. Get comfortable. And when you're ready, let's step into tonight's story. Story 1. The Reincarnation of Zhu Xiuhua. Some stories sound impossible until you realize they actually happened. Tonight, I'm going to tell you 3 true cases of people who came back not just alive, but with memories that shouldn't have belonged to them. This is one of those cases. It began with a woman named Lin Wang Yao, 37 years old, a wife, and by all accounts, an ordinary villager. She had been sick, bedridden with fever. Everyone expected the worst. But what no one could have expected was that when she died, it would not be the end of her story. It was a humid evening in a small Taiwanese village. The shutters of the Wang family's house were closed, though faint lines of light slipped through the cracks. Inside, the living room had been transformed into a mourning hall. At the center stood a simple wooden coffin, polished but unadorned, placed on 2 low wooden supports. The air was heavy with the thick smoke of incense, curling lazily upward, staining the walls with its bitter scent. Around the coffin sat villagers and relatives dressed in white mourning robes, their heads bowed. The only sound was the occasional creak of the wooden beams and the muffled sobs of family members. Closest to the coffin sat Wu Chu, Lin's husband. He was 30-something, still young, but at that moment he looked like an old man. His shoulders slumped forward, his face hidden in his hands. The smell of incense clung to his clothes. He had not eaten properly in days. In the coffin, Lin lay as she had since the moment her body was returned from the hospital. Her face was pale, almost waxen. Her black hair, carefully combed and tied back, framed a forehead where someone had placed a cloth with dried medicinal herbs, a final gesture against the fever that had consumed her. The neighbors whispered prayers in hushed voices, their words barely audible over the crackling incense. Then, suddenly, a gasp. It came from an elderly woman sitting near the door. Her eyes had widened, her hand rising instinctively to her mouth. Everyone turned. The room froze. From inside the coffin, Lin's pale fingers gripped the wooden rim. Her body shifted. Slowly, impossibly, she sat upright. Her eyes fluttered open. They were clouded at first, then focused. She licked her cracked lips and, in a hoarse whisper, asked for water. A woman who had been still, lifeless, for 3 days, had just breathed again before the eyes of her family and neighbors. The villagers shrank back in fear. Some thought they were witnessing a miracle. Others whispered that it was an omen. But no one in that room knew yet. The woman who had risen from the coffin would never again be the Lin they once knew. Just 1 week earlier, Wu Chu had been on his bicycle, pedaling furiously down the dirt road that led home. The summer sun was merciless. Sweat poured down his back, soaking his cotton shirt. Normally, the road felt easy. He had ridden it countless times. But that day, it felt like every turn of the pedals was dragging him uphill with the load too heavy to bear. His wife's fever had worsened. The doctor had warned him she might not make it through the week. Wu's legs pumped harder, but still his body felt heavy, like he was carrying someone with him. Villagers working in the fields looked up as he passed. Some scowled, muttering under their breath. When he finally reached his home, he found Lin almost unrecognizable. The fever had burned her pale. her face slick with sweat. Her breathing came in shallow rasps. She was only 37, but she looked frail and small, her body sinking into the bed. Wu tried tea, soup, cool cloths against her skin, but nothing helped. Over the next 3 days, she only worsened. By the third night, Wu knew he had no choice. He needed to get her to a hospital. With no car, he went to his neighbor's home in desperation. At first, the man looked at him with a strange, disapproving expression. But when Wu pleaded, tears in his eyes, saying his wife was dying, the man relented. Together, they lifted Lin's weak body and placed her onto the neighbor's donkey cart. The ride was long and uneven. Each bump in the road jolted her limp frame. Wu held her hand tightly, whispering to her, though she could barely respond. By the time they arrived at the hospital, she was nearly unconscious. Doctors worked frantically, but her condition deteriorated further. That night, she slipped into a coma. Hours later, her heart stopped and died. Her body was brought home and placed inside the coffin, as tradition required. For 7 days, it would remain in the family's living room until cremation. Relatives came to weep and pray. Friends offered condolences. By the third day, Wu's grief had settled into a hollow despair. He sat staring at the coffin, the incense smoke blurring his vision. Then Lin sat up. At first, everyone wanted to believe it was a miracle. Wu, trembling with joy, carried Lin from the coffin and laid her gently on their bed. He stroked her hair, whispering her name, tears rolling freely. Neighbors pressed into the doorway, some kneeling, others whispering prayers for protection. But as the hours passed, Wu noticed something unsettling. Her voice sounded different. When she spoke, it carried a new accent, sharper, more confident than her gentle tone before. Even the way she moved had changed. Lin had always walked with careful, deliberate steps, but now, when she stood, she walked briskly, faster than Wu himself. Within days, stranger differences appeared. Lin had never learned to read, yet now she picked up a Mandarin text and read it fluently. She even wrote down numbers in neat columns, explaining to him how accounts should be balanced. Bookkeeping, accounting, things she had never studied, she now spoke about with authority. Her habits shifted too. She pushed away bowls of meat with a firm shake of her head. "I don't eat that," she said, declaring herself a vegetarian. She stopped cooking entirely, a shock to Wu, who had always depended on her meals. Instead, she urged him to leave his engineering job and open a building materials shop, something completely outside their life until then. Against all odds, the business prospered under her advice. The whispers in the village grew louder. Some called it a blessing, others muttered about possession. Wu, who had once felt joy at her return, now lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering who exactly had come back from that coffin. In 1962, curiosity reached beyond the village. Government officials, hearing of Lin's story, summoned her to an army hospital for examination. She walked into the building with her usual brisk steps, her head held high. Wu followed quietly behind, his heart pounding. The chief physician stepped forward to greet her. He was a middle-aged man, accustomed to commanding respect. But before he could even speak, Lin looked him directly in the eye and said a single word, "Uncle." The room stilled. Then she turned to the woman beside him, his wife. Lin's lips curved into a faint smile. "Auntie?" The couple froze, their faces drained of color. Before they could respond, Lin continued, "My name is Zhu Xiuhua. I'm your niece." The words hit like a blow. Their niece had gone missing during the chaos of the Chinese Civil War, years before. She had vanished without a trace, Now, standing before them, this woman, once Lin Wang Yao, calmly claimed she was Zhu Xiuhua, explaining that she had been murdered by fishermen. Her spirit, she said, had lingered, restless, until it found a body to inhabit. Wu stood in stunned silence. The officials stared, caught between disbelief and unease. At first, many dismissed her as delusional, but then she began naming details. She described family ties, small habits, personal moments only Zhu would have known. She spoke of favorite foods, simple vegetarian dishes. She explained her skill with numbers, her knowledge of bookkeeping. Even her accent matched. Piece by piece, her story lined up with what the physician and his wife knew to be true. Authorities tracked down the fishermen she accused. Only one remained alive. Under questioning, the old man's face fell. He confessed. They had killed Zhu. He himself had tried to stop it, but failed. The case, once considered an unsolved disappearance, was reclassified as a murder, based solely on the testimony of a woman who had, by all accounts, been dead. It was only later that the final piece of the puzzle revealed itself. Neighbors recalled and admitted something strange about the day Wu had rushed home on his bicycle, desperate to reach Lin. They remembered watching him pedal furiously, his face red, sweat pouring down his neck. But they swore he hadn't been alone. They said they saw a woman, a stranger, riding on the back of his bicycle, sitting upright. Her dark hair streamed behind her, her posture unnervingly rigid. Wu was stunned when he heard this. He had felt something that day, yes, the terrible weight dragging him down, as if pulling another body. But he had seen no one. When he later told Lin, or rather Zhu, she gave a quiet, steady answer. She said she had been there. Her spirit had clung to Wu's bicycle as he raced home, waiting for the moment his wife's body would give out. When Lin's life slipped away, Zhu stepped in. From that moment forward, Lin Wang Yao was no longer Lin. She lived openly as Zhu. She embraced the identity fully, never wavering in her claim. And the village accepted it. Over time, whispers of suspicion softened into respect. People began to seek her out for advice, for guidance. She became a leader in the community, known not for the woman she had been, but for the woman she had become. Her life stretched on for decades. She saw her village change, saw generations grow. And in 2018, at the age of 97, she died once more. At her funeral, the banners did not settle for a single name. They carried both, Lin Wang Yao and Zhu Xiuhua. For Wu, what haunted him most was not the miracle of her return, nor even the strangeness of her transformation. It was that single bike ride, the memory of his legs trembling, the invisible weight pressing down, the way neighbors stared as though they saw something clinging to him that he himself could not. Was it grief playing tricks on him? A shared hallucination? Or had he unknowingly carried another woman's spirit into his home that day? Even now, decades later, the story divides people. Some believe it was the clearest proof of reincarnation ever recorded. Others dismiss it as folklore. But one fact remains, carved into the memory of everyone who witnessed it. The woman who rose from that coffin lived the rest of her life as someone else. Story 2. The Pingyang Township Twins. Some stories sound like folklore, impossible, unbelievable, the kind of thing you dismiss as rumor. But what if the evidence was so specific, so undeniable, that the people who witnessed it had no choice but to believe? Tonight, we go to a small township in southern China, a place where nearly everyone believes that death isn't the end. In 1991, a mother froze in the hallway, ear pressed against the nursery door. From inside, her twin daughters, who had never spoken a word in their lives, were having a full conversation. Not babbling, not toddler noises. Real sentences. Back and forth, like two adults. For 3 years, the girls had been silent. They barely even cried. But that day in Pingyang Township, a rural community in southern China, their mother realized her children were saying things they couldn't possibly know. And that was the moment she understood. Her daughters might not be her daughters at all. This is the story of the Pingyang Township twins. On a humid morning in Pingyang Township, a young mother was bent over sweeping her family's modest living room. The floor was packed earth, smoothed hard by years of footsteps, and the windows rattled gently in their wooden frames whenever a breeze passed. Her twin daughters, Shitsai and Shihongwu, were in the nursery down the hall. At 3 years old, they were unusually quiet children. Neighbors sometimes joked that the girls were born tired, because all they ever did was sleep. Even as babies, they rarely fussed, rarely cried, and they still hadn't spoken their first words. That morning, as their mother gathered the last pile of dust, she froze. From the nursery came a sharp, sudden sound, high-pitched sobbing. Her broom clattered to the floor. The twins never cried. Heart-pounding, she rushed down the hall, pushed open the door, and there they were, clutching the wooden bars of their crib, their small faces wet with tears, wailing as though terrified. She scooped them up, cradling one in each arm, whispering frantic comforts. She searched their bodies for bruises, scratches, anything wrong. Nothing. They weren't hurt, they weren't sick, they were simply inconsolable. She rocked them, humming softly until the sobs quieted into hiccups. After a few minutes, their eyes grew heavy. She laid them back in the crib, and almost instantly, they were asleep again. The house fell silent as though nothing had happened. But the image stayed with her. Her daughters' faces twisted in terror, a sound she had never thought she'd hear from them. Days later, life seemed back to normal. The twins returned to their strange, listless routine, sleeping more than playing, silent as always. One afternoon, their mother moved through the house with a basket of folded laundry. As she passed the nursery door, she stopped dead in her tracks. The door was closed. But behind it, she heard voices. She leaned closer, pressing her ear to the wood. Inside, her daughters were talking. At first, she thought maybe they were babbling, stringing sounds together like toddlers sometimes do. But the longer she listened, the more her skin prickled. These were not random noises. These were sentences, clear, adult-level sentences, spoken back and forth like a conversation between two grown people. Her heart raced. This was impossible. Her daughters had never said a single word in their lives. Yet here they were, conversing fluently, their tones shifting as though they were debating, explaining, remembering. The mother's hands trembled against the doorframe. She wanted to rush in to see them with her own eyes, to cheer at their first words, but instinct told her not to. If she entered, the spell might break. So she stayed, frozen, listening. And the more she listened, the more unsettled she became. Her daughters were talking about people she'd never heard of, places she knew they'd never been, events from another village described in detail, names, streets, arguments, even deaths. Her daughters were not supposed to know these things. They had never left Pingyang. The longer she stood there, the more a cold realization crept through her. For most parents, this would have been the moment to call a doctor, or at least a neighbor to confirm they weren't losing their mind. But this mother lived in Pingyang Township, and here, strange things were not met with denial. They were met with recognition. Pingyang was home to about 7,000 people. Tucked between rice paddies and low hills, it looked like any other rural community in southern China. But it carried a reputation whispered across the province. It was a place where reincarnation wasn't just a belief. It was a fact of life. Over 100 residents openly claimed to be reincarnated spirits of people who had died unnatural, traumatic deaths, and no one doubted them. Not their families, not their neighbors, not even the local officials. When these reincarnated villagers said something, the township listened. Sometimes it was harmless. A boy might declare he had once been a farmer, pointing out forgotten property lines or recalling the smell of his old ox. But other times, it meant conflict. A man might accuse another of insulting him in a past life, and the fight would spill into the street. Or someone would demand repayment of a debt owed decades earlier, insisting it carried into this life. And people paid. They always paid. In one famous case, a young boy swore he had once been a pig, slaughtered by the local butcher. He described the killing in chilling detail. The butcher, rather than mock him, quietly closed his shop for good. No one wanted to risk offending a reincarnated soul. In Pingyang, reincarnation isn't fantasy. It's daily reality. So, when this mother pressed her ear to the nursery door and heard her daughters speak of lives and deaths they couldn't possibly know, her horror gave way to certainty. Her twins were not ordinary. They were reincarnated. The mother did not hide what she'd heard. Instead, she spread the word, not just among neighbors, but across Pingyang. She hoped someone, somewhere, might recognize the details her daughters had described. Within days, her wish was answered. A knock came at the family's door. When she opened it, a man and woman stood outside. Strangers. Their expressions were pale, hesitant but expectant. When the twins saw them, they didn't hesitate. One pointed. Mother. The other followed. Father. The man and the woman gasped. The room seemed to tilt. And then the torrent began. The little girls launched into stories, their high-pitched voices carrying words far beyond their years. They spoke of a different village, naming roads and houses with precision. They described their lives not as sisters, but as best friends, teenagers. And they spoke of how those lives had ended. Through tears and giggles, the twins explained, they had ended their own lives together just 1 month before being reborn in Pingyang. They told the man and the woman how they had walked hand in hand to a secluded spot, how they had made a pact. They described the place, the method, even the aftermath. Who had found them? How the villagers had whispered. They recited details that only the families of the dead girls could have known. The color of their dresses that night. The way one of them had braided the other's hair just hours before. The man and the woman sat stunned, tears rolling down their cheeks. When the twins' mother asked softly, "Are these details true?" They could only nod. "Yes," they whispered. "Every word." From that day, the twins never pretended to be ordinary children. They admitted to their mother that the reason they had stayed silent so long was because they were guarding their secret. And the endless sleeping? They said it was because in dreams they could return to their old lives, the ones they still missed. Doctors, skeptics, outsiders, no one has ever been able to explain how 2 3-year-olds who had never spoken before could suddenly produce such accurate, detailed knowledge of strangers and places they had never encountered. In Pingyang, no one questioned it. For them, it was simple. The twins were reincarnated. And to this day, Pingyang Township remains one of the most unusual places in the world, where the line between past and present lives seems to blur in ways no science has yet explained. Story 3. Sumitra Shiva Tripathi. Some stories feel engineered to be unbelievable until the details are checked, the interviews are recorded, and the pieces still fit. This one begins in a poor village in northern India in 1984, with a young mother cradling her first child, and ends with a woman waking from death, insisting she is someone else entirely. By the end of December 1984, Sumitra held her newborn son almost constantly, the baby bound to her chest as she swept the hard-packed floor or stirred lentils over a smoking clay stove. She'd wanted a child for as long as she could remember. Her own childhood had been shadowed. A mother lost too early, a father gone to distant labor, a cousin filling the gaps where parents should have been. Marriage had given her shelter, but her husband traveled for work. Most days she lived with her in-laws in their low hut, trying to please people who were not her people. The baby changed all of that. With him tied against her heartbeat, she didn't feel alone. One morning in early 1985, she was walking the dusty path to the village well, bucket swinging, boy tight to her chest, when she halted so abruptly the bucket thumped the ground. A nearby man turned at the sound and saw Sumitra standing rigid, fingers bent back at an impossible angle. Her eyes rolled white. Her teeth ground side to side with a dry, cracking scrape that raised the hairs on his arms. The baby started to scream. A small crowd formed. Before anyone could move, the spell broke. Sumitra blinked, confused, cheeks wet, embarrassed by the staring faces. She gathered the bucket and hurried on as if nothing had happened. Weeks later, it happened again, longer now. Her father-in-law found her in the kitchen, rigid, eyes upturned, unresponsive to shaking. 10 minutes before she came back. No memory. By May, the village had learned to recognize the episodes. They lasted hours. In some, Sumitra spoke. "Help," she would cry, clutching her head. "My skull is being crushed." Then her voice would drop to a thread. "I can only see dark." The local healer examined her repeatedly. He found no fever, no wasting illness, nothing he could name, just the trances. On July 16th, 1985, 6 months into this, Sumitra stiffened mid-task and with eerie calm said, "In 3 days, I will die." By then, dread ruled the household. She refused to touch her son for fear she'd fall into a spell and drop him. The boy's grandmother took over his care. Her husband stayed home, forfeiting wages, watching her like a sentry. On July 19th, the predicted day, Sumitra kept herself away from knives, fire, stairs, anything sharp, hot, or high. The afternoon passed without incident. Relief loosened the knots in everyone's shoulders. At dusk, she stepped outside for air. A friend across the lane waved and began to cross. Sumitra smiled, lifted a hand, and froze. Her arms rose to her forehead, fingers clawing at empty air. Her breathing turned ragged and loud. The friend reached her, helpless, whispering her name. The clawing stopped. Sumitra's hands fell to her sides. A deep rattling drone rolled out of her throat and sank lower, lower, until it broke. Then nothing. Standing upright, she wasn't breathing. The scream drew the village. The healer arrived, pressed 2 fingers to her neck, an ear to her chest, peered into her eyes. "She is dead," he said. They lowered her rigid body onto the packed earth outside the hut. There would be no ambulance, no official. Here, death rituals must be tended quickly, for faith and for health. Women washed her with careful hands, oils slicking her cheeks. Men set off to gather wood for the pyre. Children were called indoors, doors latched. People spoke little. Some wept. Most watched the line her body made against the darkening yard and tried not to look at the impossible, how the day had matched her prediction to the hour. Whispers rippled. Had something taken her? Was it still here? As the sun thinned to a line along the horizon, A woman brushing Sumitra's hair gasped and lurched back, brush clattering. Others stared. Under closed lids, Sumitra's eyes flicked left, right. Her chest lifted on a sudden breath. A long exhale shuddered out of her. Her eyelids opened. She sat bolt upright. The women stumbled away. What shocked them most was not the movement, but the color in her face, the life. For 45 minutes she had been gone. No pulse, no breath, a pallor you don't mistake. Now she wiped oil from her cheeks like someone annoyed with ceremonial fussing and tried to stand. The healer pushed through and steadied her, checked again. Pulse present, heartbeat strong, pupils responsive. He turned to the ring of neighbors and smiled broadly. "You have witnessed a miracle," he said. "She has returned." Her husband dropped to his knees, sobbing with relief, and lunged to embrace her. She recoiled as if from a blow, palms up to ward him off. The healer stepped between them, murmuring that shock could twist a mind, that rest might return her to herself. They led her to bed. She slept. At dawn, she rose clear-eyed, walked into the main room, and, at the sight of her husband and in-laws, bolted for the door. The healer and her husband caught her in the lane. When he took her arm, she wrenched free and snapped, "How dare you touch another man's wife?" Back inside, she raked the rooms with a stranger's scrutiny and spat, "This is not my home. You are not my family." She kept repeating a name none of them knew, Shiva Dueti or Tripathi, accusing her in-laws of killing her. The changes mounted. She refused to hold the son she had once clutched to her chest. She demanded Rinku and Tinku, names that meant nothing to anyone there. She would not eat from their pots or plates. She wrapped her sari in a different urbane style. Her voice shifted, lighter, quicker, educated, and her manner turned sharp. At night, she wrote letters, long, pleading letters, to people her family had never heard of, begging them to come take her home. Neighbors muttered madness or possession. Her family braced for the long work of protecting her from herself. On October 20th, 1985, a knock sounded at the door. Sumitra's husband opened it to find an older man in a suit and polished shoes, clothing so out of place in their village it felt theatrical. He held a thick leather-bound album to his chest, gold-edged pages glinting. His voice was soft. "My name is Ram Tripathi. Is there a young woman here who has begun acting differently?" Suspicion warred with confusion. The husband told the man to wait, turned and walked to the back room. "There's a stranger asking for you," he said flatly. Sumitra looked up and, for the first time in months, smiled, a radiant, relieved smile. She ran to the door and flung herself into the visitor's arms. He stiffened, startled, the album pinned between them. She leaned close and whispered a single word, "Papa." For a heartbeat, his face darkened. Anger, grief, denial all at once. Then he pulled back, opened the album, and motioned for her to sit with him on the low wall outside. "Tell me who these people are," he said, pointing to a group photograph. Without hesitation, she named them all, names her husband did not recognize. He turned a page, another clustered. She named them too. Page after page, the same. Faces, and then names in a voice not her own. He stopped at a single portrait and tapped the image. "And this?" Sumitra's breath quickened. Her mouth shaped a grim line. "My sister-in-law," she said. "She killed me. She hit my head with a brick." The album dropped to the ground. The man's arms went around her. They wept like people who had remembered each other after a very long separation. Inside, the visitor told a story that reshaped the room. Shiva, the name Sumitra had insisted was hers, had lived in a city 60 miles away. She was well-educated, well-off, married with 2 small sons. Her youngest had been born within days of Sumitra's boy. But where Sumitra had felt her life finally open, Shiva's had narrowed into darkness. Her in-laws despised her education and her family. Conflict built like storm heat in a closed room. She wrote letters to her relatives describing nights of nightmares and dread. In May 1985, around the time Sumitra began speaking in her trances, a public fight ignited over whether Shiva would attend a family wedding. On the night of May 18th, neighbors saw Shiva's in-laws carrying her limp body along the railway tracks in the dark. When confronted, they said she was ill and needed a hospital. In the morning, Shiva's body was found on the tracks near the station. Her in-laws told police she had killed herself by stepping in front of a train. Her uncle and sister saw no tearing or mangling you'd expect from an impact, just a severe head wound, as if something heavy had smashed her skull. Before her own family could intervene, the in-laws had the body cremated. The police accepted the suicide story. The case ended without an investigation. Shiva's father, Ram, did not accept it. Months later, he heard a rumor from a distant village. A young woman had died and returned calling herself Shiva, demanding her sons Rinku and Tinku, writing to people who did not live there. He arrived with his album, ready to disprove a cruel hoax. The album didn't disprove it. It did the opposite. In the house, small mismatches snapped into place. The higher city accent, the new sari style, the refusal to eat from their utensils, the letters mailed to names no one in the village recognized, names Ram knew very well. The boys' nicknames, Rinku and Tinku, were exact. The claim of a brick and a sister-in-law matched long-held suspicions and the wound the family had seen. Sumitra's husband stood by the door, stunned. The child in the next room whimpered, and Sumitra flinched, not with guilt now, but with grief for a life that had ended on a railway. Word of the case spread far beyond the village. Investigators who study unusual memories in children and cases suggestive of reincarnation traveled to interview Sumitra, her family, and Shiva's relatives. They documented statements, timelines, and behavior changes. One such group is known for rigorous fieldwork in India, based at a major American university. Their conclusion was not a courtroom verdict, but it was stark. The case did not present as a hoax. The convergence of names, places, habits, languages, letters, and specific claims, especially those not publicly known, was difficult to explain away. Local authorities eventually reopened aspects of the death and questioned members of Shiva's in-law family. Some charges were brought. In the end, Sumitra's testimony, however compelling, was ruled inadmissible in court. Officially, the death was never solved. Unofficially, few believed the tracks told the whole story. From that season forward, Sumitra lived as Shiva. Shiva's parents accepted her. Visits passed with the complicated ease of people who know and don't know each other at once. Over time, Sumitra also turned back toward the child she'd borne and the man she'd married. Grief and duty braided together into a life she could carry. She died in 1998. It's easy to say possession or trauma, to file everything under words that make the mystery smaller. But there are facts here that resist being filed. A predicted death, a body without breath for 3/4 of an hour, a return, a stranger at a door with a book of faces, names spoken without a pause, private details aligned. If you've come this far, tell me, was Sumitra a woman whose mind shattered under stress, or was she the second vessel for a life that ended on a railway track? And if it's the latter, how many stories like this do we never hear? Drop your take in the comments. I'm listening.